Let's talk about the Samsung Galaxy S8 once again. More precisely, let's talk about the specs this time. So we're at the end of February now, and some of you might know that the Samsung Galaxy S8 launch event is actually happening on March 29th. So yeah, it's basically a month away, and the announcement is now official. So Samsung actually announced the announcement for the S8 at MWC. So this is the announcement for the announcement. So March 29th is the exact date at which Samsung will unveil the Samsung Galaxy S8. Now when it comes to the Samsung Galaxy S8, we already know pretty much everything in terms of it. So we know exactly how it's going to look like. We've had a ton of design leaks, a ton of schematics, a ton of renderings, case leaks, and even prototype leaks, a ton of leaks regarding the design of the S8. And if you want to know more about the design of the S8, I've done a separate video, a final design video just on that. So in case you're curious regarding the design of the S8. And then also when it comes to the specs, we pretty much know everything. So we know the CPU, we know the GPU, the amount of RAM, storage options, all the special features. So basically everything is known about the S8. So since in my previous videos I covered the final design and the one really awesome feature that's unfortunately going to be missing from the S8, in this video I want to focus on all the final specs and also all the final features of the S8. So grab your popcorn because I have a lot of things I want to cover. So this is going to be another pretty long video. So yeah, enjoy. So when it comes to the specs of the Samsung Galaxy S8, as I said before, we already knew pretty much everything, with a few exceptions however. So no one knew exactly if the S8 Plus was going to come with 6GB of RAM or 8GB of RAM. Now just last week we actually had a pretty major leak coming from EveLeaks, also known as Evan Blass. So Evan Blass, he's one of the most trusted leakers. Basically almost everything he leaked turned out to be correct. So he posted this last week. So this seems to be the official Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus spec sheet. So here's the spec sheet, and this is what I'm going to talk about in this video in more detail. Okay, so starting off with number one, we have the CPU. So in terms of the CPU, we have two options for the S8. So one of them is the Exynos 8895, which is made by Samsung, and the second one is the new Snapdragon 835. So the Snapdragon 835 is going to be the CPU that's going to be included in the US versions of the S8 and the S8 Plus. And then the Exynos 8895, this is going to be the CPU for the international market. Okay, so let's start with the Exynos 8895 first. So this is everything you need to know about the Exynos 8895. So this is a processor designed by Samsung itself. So this is an in-house design chip. And by the way, the official page for the Exynos 8895 actually went live on Samsung.com last week. So you can check it out. Feel free to check it out for more details. But basically, here's the summary. So the Exynos 8895 is based on a smaller 10nm process, which means that the chip itself is about 40% smaller in size than the 8890, which is what we had on the Galaxy S7 and the S7 Edge. And since it's based on the smaller 10nm process, it's also more powerful and also more power efficient. So in my first Samsung Galaxy S8 Leaks and Rumors episode back in December, I did talk about the processors just a bit. So in that video I said that the Exynos 8895 was going to be about 30% faster than the 8890. Now apparently, according to Samsung, it's actually going to be 27% faster, so pretty close to 30%, which is a pretty good improvement considering that this is also more power efficient. So this is actually 30% more power efficient than what we had in the S7 and the S7 Edge. Now besides this, the Exynos 8895 also comes with a brand new ISP, or image signal processor. So apparently this is 70% better than the previous one. So in theory, this would allow for some really awesome HDR processing. So maybe something like HDR Plus like we have on the Google Pixel. So the images that you take with the Google Pixel with the HDR Plus mode activated, well, they simply look straight out of Photoshop. So they look really good. This as well will most likely be included in the Samsung Galaxy S8. Now just like the Exynos 8890, the 8895 is an octa-core processor, so you basically have two quad-core processors inside. One of them is a high-performance 2.5 GHz chip, and the other one is a low-performance 1.70 GHz processor. Now apparently that high-performance 2.5 GHz quad-core processor, that one can actually turbo boost up to 3 GHz in speed, which is really impressive for a mobile phone processor. Now, the Geekbench scores, by the way, have actually been leaked. So these are the scores, so 2301 for the single core and 1719 for the multi-core one in Geekbench. So the multi-core one is indeed pretty expected since you have 4 high-performance cores, but it's still quite behind the iPhone 7 when it comes to the single-core one, which the iPhone 7 did score 3448 and 5609. So yeah, the difference is pretty big when it comes to the single core scores. And then also these scores of the Exynos 80 and 95, they're not that different from the Exynos 80 and 90 that we had inside the S7 and the S7 Edge. And then the second option for the processor is the Snapdragon 835. So again, this is going to be the model for the US market. So if you live in the US and if you get an S8 or an S8 Plus, you're going to get the Snapdragon 835. And the Snapdragon 835 is also based on that smaller 10nm process. So it's actually 35% smaller in size than the previous one, and it's about 25% better when it comes to power consumption. So that's a pretty significant difference. However, keep in mind that the Exynos is 40% better when it comes to power consumption when compared to the Exynos 80 and 90. Same as with the Exynos, this is also an octa-core processor, so you have 4 high-performance cores and 4 low-performance cores, and the high-performance ones are actually clocked at 2.45 GHz, which is slightly lower than what we have on the Exynos. However, the low-performance cores are actually clocked at 1.9, so they're actually higher than what we would have on the Exynos models of the S8. And then same as with the Exynos, the official page for the Snapdragon 835 is live, so go ahead, check it out if you want to read more details regarding this processor. Now overall, I think that the Exynos 80 and 95 is the better option for the S8. So on the S7 we had the Exynos 80 and 90 and the Snapdragon 820, and the S7 models with the Exynos chip, they actually had a slightly better battery life. They were actually more fluid, apps opened a tiny bit faster. The only advantage to the Snapdragon 820 models was the GPU, so in intensive apps and games, they actually perform better than the Exynos models. Other than that, the battery life and the overall system UI fluidity was better with the Exynos models. And I do believe that this is going to be the case again in 2017 with the Exynos 80 and 95 and the Snapdragon 835. Now, speaking of the GPUs, there's quite a lot of things that I want to mention here. So yeah, section number 2, we have the GPUs. So when it comes to the GPU, this one actually depends on what processor you have inside the S8. So if you have the Exynos model, the Exynos 80 and 95, this one would actually come with a brand new ARM, I think it's Mali G71 chip. So this would be the GPU inside the Exynos models of the S8. This one actually comes with twice the graphical performance of the previous chip, the Mali T880, which is what we had in the S7 and the S7 Edge. Besides this, it also supports the Vulkan API and also OpenES 3.2. And if you take a look at Samsung's page for the Exynos 8095, it actually supports display resolution of up to 4K Ultra HD. Now on the Snapdragon side with the 835, it would actually get the Adreno 540 GPU. So this is actually very similar to the Mali G71 chip. So this one has about a 20% graphical performance improvement over the previous generation, the 530. However, this one actually supports up to 60 times more colors than the previous generation. It also supports that 4K UHD display. However, the Adreno 540 actually supports 10-bit panels, so 10-bit panels, and also a color gamut of Rec 2020. So this is actually higher than the DCI-P3 color gamut that we have on the 5K Retina iMac, and the new iPhone 7s and the new iPads. Not exactly sure when we'll see a Rec 2020 display on a mobile phone. That would be really interesting, but yeah, this is higher than DCI-P3. So this was everything in terms of the CPU and the GPU on the S8 and the S8 Plus. Let me know in the comments, by the way, if you prefer an Exynos model of the S8 or if you would prefer a Snapdragon model, considering that now you pretty much know everything in terms of the CPU and all the GPU details. So moving on to section number 3, we have the RAM. So we actually have some pretty major updates when it comes to the RAM on the S8. So in terms of the RAM, in my first Leaks and Rumors episode of the S8, some of you might remember that I said that the S8 Plus will most likely come with either 6GB of RAM or 8GB of RAM, and then the S8 will either come with 4 or 6. Then in an update video, I said that the S8 Plus will most likely come with 6GB of RAM, not 8, and then maybe 8GB in only the Asian markets. Now, when it comes to the RAM, I have some pretty disappointing news, unfortunately. So neither of these options seem to be the case, at least not according to Evan Blass's new spec sheet leak. So according to this leak, you might have noticed that the S8 Plus comes with 4GB of RAM. So he didn't actually say anything about the regular S8, but yeah, the regular S8 is most likely going to come with 4GB of RAM as well. I don't actually see Samsung going back with the S8 and having, 3GB of RAM or 2GB, especially since with the S7 and the S7 Edge, we did have 4GB of RAM on both. Now, this is a bit disappointing to hear, and that's not because 4GB of RAM wouldn't be enough. 4GB of RAM is actually way too much for a phone, especially for the casual user that only uses Facebook, Instagram, and social apps. But when it comes to more demanding apps now use more and more memory. So 4GB of RAM is definitely needed, even more depending on what demanding apps you use. But on Android, you don't actually have that many demanding apps. So on iOS, you have apps like GarageBand, in which you can compose music. You have iMovie, in which you can actually edit 4K videos. You don't actually have that demanding apps on Android. In fact, on Android, the most demanding app when it comes to memory is actually the overlay, the system overlay, which in Samsung's case is TouchWiz. So I did quite a few ultimate speed tests between multiple phones, including the S7 Edge. And yeah, basically the iPhone 6s, which only comes with 2GB of RAM, heavily outperformed the S7 Edge with 4GB of RAM when it comes to keeping apps open in the background. So the S7 Edge was even struggling with 5 really demanding apps to keep them open in the background. And this was, by the way, on the Exynos model, not on the Snapdragon one. So yeah, this is a really major issue when it comes to TouchWiz, and not even to mention the bloatware and the overall system lag that you still have. I mean, I still have quite a lot of lag on my S7 Edge, something that I don't have on my Google Pixel, for example. And another thing that I don't have on my Google Pixel is the RAM management issues that I have on my S7 Edge. So 4GB of RAM on something like an iOS device or a Google Pixel is definitely enough. But when it comes to Samsung and TouchWiz, it's definitely not enough, unless Samsung really optimizes TouchWiz. Now, with the S8, it's actually going to be called Grace UX, so it's going to look really similar to what we had on the Note 7, slightly improved, so slightly faster, and with some slightly visual tweaks. Hopefully they do manage to fix all the RAM issues, which I do believe might be the case, especially since Samsung usually upgrades the RAM every single year. So since we only see 4GB of RAM on both the S8 and the S8 Plus, hopefully this points towards an improved RAM management on TouchWiz. Moving on to section number 4, we have the storage options. So here I have some pretty awesome news. So the spec sheet coming from EveLeaks confirms that the S8, at least the S8 Plus, is going to come with 64GB of onboard storage, and you also have the option to add a microSD card like we had before with the S7. So 64GB as the baseline model, and then also the ability to upgrade that further with a microSD card is really, really impressive. Keep in mind that Apple only updated their storage with the iPhone 7, which comes with 32GB now, up from 16, which was last year. And with the iPhone 7, you don't have the option to add a microSD card. Now, speaking of microSD cards, unfortunately, there are a few drawbacks. So, for example, the I/O, so the read and write speeds are much lower than the internal storage, which means that, well, it's not recommended that you actually store apps on your SD card. Usually use the SD card to store images, so photos and videos, and that's pretty much it. But still, having 64GB as the baseline model and also the option to add a microSD card, well, the S8 is simply going to murder the iPhone 7 when it comes to storage. The iPhone 7 again only comes with 32GB of storage. Okay, so this was the S8 Plus. Now what about the S8? Well, there is a chance that the S8 will come with 32GB as the baseline model instead of 64. And another option is for both models to come with both 64 and 128GB as well. Now, I still don't think that this is going to be the case. I still believe that this is 64GB is what we're going to see on both the S8 and the S8 Plus as only as the baseline and also as the only options when it comes to storage, especially since you do have that option to expand the storage with a microSD card. So I don't actually see the point in Samsung making two models, 64 and 128, or even 32 and 64. But yeah, the price is going to go up when it comes to the S8. So the S8 and the S8 Plus will be more expensive. So yeah, this is going to justify the storage increase as well. So do keep that in mind. Moving on to section number 5, we have the display. So there's quite a few updates when it comes to the displays on the S8 and the S8 Plus. So in my first episode on the S8, I said that the S8 and the S8 Plus, most specifically the S8 Plus, will come with a 4K display. That's basically what all the sources and all the rumors were pointing towards in December. Then in a more recent episode, I said that another option is still the same Quad HD display, however with an RGB matrix instead of a Pentel matrix, which basically means that you would get more subpixels, that you would get more blue and red subpixels, which in the end would mean that even though you have the exact same resolution, since you have more subpixels, the image would be a lot clearer in VR. So if you use VR, those phones will be much better than the S7 and the S7 Edge with a Pentel matrix. But actually neither of these are going to be the case, because Samsung is actually moving towards a 6-inch 720p display. No, I'm just joking. It's not going, that was a bad joke. It's not going to be a 720p display. The display is actually going to be 6.2 inches on the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus and 5.7 inches on the S8. Also, the display is going to be curved on both models, so no flat version of the S8 anymore, just edges. Both models will have edges. But yeah, 720p is definitely not going to be the resolution. That was just a bad joke. The actual resolution is going to be Quad HD Plus. So what does this mean? Well, Quad HD Plus actually means a higher resolution than 1440p. So it's still lower than 4K. It's not 4K, but it's higher than Quad HD or 1440p what we had on the S7 and the S7 Edge. So it's actually a resolution of 3200 by 1800, which is a pretty substantial improvement from the S7 and the S7 Edge. Also, there were quite a few reports suggesting that this was going to be an 18:9 aspect ratio, so something like we have on the LG G6. Now, no, this is not going to be the case. It's still going to be a 16:9 display. So basically, actually, if you do the math, you can see that 3200 by 1800 is actually 16:9. And also, speaking of calculations, the PPI has also been increased. So if you do the math for the PPI, it's 592 now from 534 like we had on the S7 Edge. So this is what we have on the S8 Plus now. So quite a significant, so to say, improvement. It's not a major improvement, but it's still something that it's still going to look better in VR. And then with the S8, we're going to have 644 coming from 577, which is what we had on the S7. So I personally wasn't expecting to see this middle ground when it comes to resolution. I was either expecting Quad HD with an RGB matrix or 4K, full 4K. And seeing this is actually some pretty decent news. So yeah, this means that both phones will be better when it comes to VR, better than the S7 and the S7 Edge. However, if you want the ultimate VR experience, either get the Sony Xperia, the new Sony Xperia XZ, which does come with a full 4K display, or another option is for you to get the S8 over the S8 Plus, because it does have quite a substantially higher PPI than the S8 Plus. So yeah, the S8 with a 5.7 inches display is going to be better in VR than the S8 Plus. Moving on to section number 6, I have a few updates when it comes to the battery life on the S8 and the S8 Plus. So on the Samsung Galaxy S7, we had a 3000 mAh battery, and on the S7 Edge, we had a 3600 mAh battery. Now, with the S8, we're actually expecting to get 3000 mAh, so same as with the S7, and with the S8 Plus, we're expecting to get 3500, so actually lower than what we had on the S7 Edge. Now, on the other hand, a newer report suggests a battery size of 3250 mAh on the S7, on the S8, and 3750 on the S8 Plus, so quite a small increase from the previous reports. However, yeah, it's not looking that great for the S8. However, do keep in mind that the new processors are based on a smaller 10nm processor, so they're also more power efficient. However, you do have a larger display, so more pixels to light up, which also means that, yeah, in the end, you won't actually see that much increase in battery life over the S7 and the S7 Edge. So it's going to be pretty much the same, maybe a tiny bit better, hopefully. Now, the S8 and the S8 Plus are going to be a tiny bit thicker than the S7 and the S7 Edge. So a schematic from OnLeaks did show that the S8 is going to be 8mm thick versus 7.9, which is what we had on the S7. So 3250 and 3750 is also what I believe that the battery life is going to be on the S8 and the S8 Plus. So again, not a substantial increase. Basically, you're going to get pretty much the same battery life as on the S7 and the S7 Edge. Moving on to section number 7, I want to mention all the final features of the Samsung Galaxy S8. And there's quite a lot of features that I want to mention, so yeah, feel free to grab that second round of popcorn. So number 1, with a high resolution display on the S8 and the S8 Plus, VR is also going to be a pretty major feature of the S8. And Samsung has just launched a new version of their Gear VR basically yesterday at MWC. So this is the new Gear VR. It still has the exact same 101 degree field of view like we had on a previous version. You also have the same micro USB and USB-C connectors, so you can basically connect this to the S8 and the S7 Edge and the S7 and even the Note 7. If you still have a Note 7, you can use this with the Note 7. But yeah, the main feature of this new Gear VR is actually the controller. So the new Gear VR comes with a dedicated controller which has a few buttons and a touchpad, so you can actually control your apps, the menu, and play games with this. And by the way, the controller pairs via Bluetooth, so this means that you can also buy it separately. Samsung has actually mentioned this, and use it with the previous versions of Gear VRs on the S7 and the S7 Edge, for example, or the S6, Note 5, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Number 2, this is a pretty interesting one. So the Exynos 8895 actually supports 4K playback in up to 120 frames per second, and besides this, it also supports H.265, something that not even macOS supports. So not even, if you have macOS, you cannot actually play H.265 files. You cannot even edit them or play them, which kind of sucks. But the S8 is apparently going to be able to do this, which is pretty interesting. Definitely wasn't expecting this. Number 3, the Exynos 8895 also gets some LTE improvements. So now you can have speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second download speeds and upload speeds up to 125 megabits per second. So that's pretty impressive considering that this is a phone and this is LTE, this is not Wi-Fi, this is LTE. It's definitely not the speeds of 5G, which is basically 5 gigabits per second. It's just 1 gigabit per second but it's still much faster than what we had before. So pretty impressive when it comes to LTE on the S8. It's definitely going to take a while until the carriers catch up with the speeds. Number 4, we have the Iris scanner. So the Iris scanner is coming back from the Note 7. So it was first introduced on the Note 7, and now with the S8, we are going to get a slightly improved version of the Iris scanner. It's going to be faster, it's also going to be more precise and also more secure. So for example, in the Exynos 8895, on Samsung's page at least, Samsung states that it actually comes with a security subsystem, which includes the Iris scanner and the fingerprint recognition. And same as with the Note 7, the Iris scanner would also have an infrared sensor, so it would basically work in complete darkness, which is definitely an amazing feature to have. You don't actually need light to be able to unlock your phone using your iris. 5, we have water resistance. So on the S7 and the S7 Edge, we had an IP rating of IP68, and on the S8, we're still expecting to get IP68. In fact, this is basically what the spec sheet leak from EveLeaks says, IP68 water resistance. Now, there are a few reports suggesting that water resistance might actually be improved on the S8. So on the S7 and S7 Edge, again, we had IP68. 6 meant that it was full dust protected, and the 8 meant that it could stand submersion in water more than 1 meter of depth up to basically any time. So the time and also the depth was specified by the manufacturer. So for the S7 and the S7 Edge, that was 1.5 meters up to 30 minutes. And for the S8, we might be getting 1.5 meters up to 1 hour or something like that. So don't expect a major improvement, but do expect to see some sort of improvement when it comes to water resistance. Maybe simply the fact that it's actually covered by the warranty. Number 6, wireless charging is still going to be there. So it's not going away. It's not going to be long-range wireless charging. This is something that we might expect to see on the iPhone 8. I covered this in this video, by the way. So yeah, wireless charging is still coming to the S8 like we had on the S7 and the S6. So do expect to be able to buy a charging pad, maybe an improved version of the charging pad that we got with the S7. So do expect to see quicker, faster charge on that wireless charging pad, which you do have to buy separately, by the way. But yeah, except for some charging time improvements on that charging pad, don't expect anything major on wireless charging with the S8. Number 7, this is definitely a pretty interesting one. So you probably know that the S8 doesn't actually have a home button. Basically all the buttons are now gone because of the bezels, and the fingerprint reader has actually been moved to the back. So unfortunately it's not integrated into the display as we previously believed, even though Samsung does have quite a lot of patents suggesting just this. And I covered that fingerprint reader not being built into the display in this video. Samsung Galaxy S8, one major missing feature. But yeah, when it comes to the home button and the multitasking button and the back button, all of those buttons will be included into the display. So these are going to be on-screen buttons like we have on the Google Pixel, however, with actually 2 major differences. So the first difference is that that bar is actually going to be transparent. So you'll be able to see if you're in an app, you will actually get that screen real estate versus the Google Pixel, on which you simply have that black bar, which does take quite a lot of screen real estate when you're not watching a movie or not in a game. And then the second big change is that you would actually get haptic feedback when you press those buttons. And those buttons will also be able to be customized and rearranged. So for example, if you wish, you could have the back button on the left instead of on the right like we have on all Samsung models. Let me know in the comments, by the way, if this was ever an issue for you, having the back button on the right on Samsung devices. This was never an issue for me personally. This was actually an issue for me with the Google Pixel and other Android smartphones, because I'm right-handed, and I do think that the back button should be on the right-hand side of the device, since you do access the back button more than the multitasking one. So it kind of makes sense to have it on the right than on the left. And we even had some pretty major leaks confirming these buttons. So for example, we had some prototype leaks showing that that home button, that back button, and the multitasking button, and also the transparent bar. We even had some leaked images from the Samsung Galaxy S8 manual. So this actually shows the buttons on the S8, multitasking home, and back. Number 8 is a Taptic engine like on the iPhone 7. So on the iPhone 7 you have a Taptic engine that gives you feedback depending on what you do in the phone. So for example, if you adjust the alarm, you can actually feel the alarm wheel scrolling. And this also applies to messages. When you send different effects like fireworks, you can actually feel those fireworks thanks to that vibration motor. Now, I'm not exactly sure in what way it would work on the S8. It would definitely be used for that feedback on the home button, back button, and multitasking buttons. I'm not exactly sure if it's actually going to be the same as on the iPhone 7, so if it's going to give you multiple levels of feedback depending on what you do, or if it's only going to be used for that home button, multitasking button, and back button. But yeah, Taptic engine is coming with the S8. Number 9, I've seen that in my past videos on the S8. A lot of you have asked me if the S8 was going to come with an IR blaster, so an infrared blaster that you basically could control the TV with, so you would be able to use that phone as a TV remote. We had this on the HTC One M8, M7, I think the M9 as well, and we had it on the S4, the S5, the S6, and then with the Samsung Galaxy S7, this feature was unfortunately removed. Now, I do think that was a really cool feature. I don't actually have a TV anymore. I don't watch TV, I don't use TV, but for people who do, that's a really cool feature. Unfortunately, it's not coming with the S8, so don't expect an IR blaster with the S8. Would I want one? Yeah. Would I use one? Probably not, but a lot of people would. Number 10, this is one of the most interesting features, by the way, so I haven't talked about this one before in my previous videos. So Samsung is actually going to introduce a dock for the S8 so that you can dock your S8 and connect it to the TV with a HDMI connection. So you would be able to play maybe video games, Android video games. Maybe you would be able to use that controller from the Gear VR as well. But you can see this in Samsung's leaked manual images. So you can see this dock. Apparently it's going to be called DX Dock. So again, games and being able to watch movies and basically everything from your phone onto your big screen TV, which you can already do if you have a Samsung Smart TV, or if you have a Chromecast, for example, you can already do that. But still, it's going to be a pretty interesting thing to try out. Oh, and by the way, let me know, I'm kind of curious to see if any of you stream any content from your phone onto your TV. So if you use Apple TV or Google Chromecast or the Amazon Fire Stick or anything like that. Number 11, this is nothing that interesting. USB-C is coming with the S8. So we've already seen this on the Note 7. USB-C is returning from the Note 7 onto the S8. So no more micro USB connector. Number 12, this is something that I wasn't expecting, to be honest. So if you take a look again at EveLeak's spec sheet, you can see that the headphones that are going to come inside the box of the S8 are going to be tuned by AKG. Now, some of you might know that AKG, it's a sound company, and this one belongs to Harman, and Harman is more popular than AKG, so you probably heard of Harman, and Harman was actually bought by Samsung last year in 2016. Now keep in mind that these are not going to be AKG headphones or Harman headphones, so these are still going to be made by Samsung and only tuned by AKG. Now this still means that the sound quality is going to be better than on the headphones that we got with the S7 and the S7 Edge. Those headphones were pretty bad, I have to say. And yeah, hopefully they will be on par at least with Apple's EarPods, maybe, and hopefully actually better than these. And finally, number 13 is going to be a new voice assistant, which is going to replace S-Voice. So it's actually going to be called Bixby. So Bixby is coming with the S8 as Samsung's new voice assistant. So this will compete with the Google Assistant that we have on the Google Pixel and also Siri. At the moment, Siri is the most underdeveloped one, so to say. And that's because with Siri, you cannot actually have a conversation. So you have to ask her a question, and then if you want to know what's the weather like in a different city, you'll have to ask the same question over again. With Google Assistant, you can actually have conversations, even though they're kind of limited, and with Bixby, you would be able to have supposedly even more human-like conversations that you could with the Google Assistant. But yeah, this was everything in terms of all the final features and also all the final specs of the Samsung Galaxy S8. Feel free to check out my final design video in case you've missed that, and also feel free to subscribe if you have enjoyed this video and if you want to see more videos, more Leaks and Rumors episodes like this one. Let me know in the comments what was your favorite feature of the S8 and what's the thing that you're most excited to see. For me personally, it's actually the display, so I'm really excited for that PPI increase because that way I would be able to enjoy VR even sharper. But yeah, the Xperia XZ is going to be the best option because that phone actually comes with a 4K display, and it was, by the way, just announced yesterday at MWC. If you have enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like to let me know. It took quite a long time to make, so every feedback is really appreciated. And also, if you want to know more tech, if you want to get more tech updates from me, feel free to follow me on Twitter at ZenofTech. That's usually where I'm most active at, so you can ask me any tech-related questions there as well. And also don't forget to enable notifications of my channel on both desktop and mobile by simply clicking that bell icon next to my channel, and you'll be notified as soon as I upload a brand new video. There's quite a lot of issues still with the subscription feed, so if you enable notifications, you'll be notified as soon as I upload a new video. But yeah, this was pretty much it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you're epic enough to make it until the end by saying I was epic enough to make it until the end of this video. And yeah, this was pretty much it for this video. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Hopefully my voice recovers. So otherwise I'll wear a Batman suit, or I don't know. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. ZenofTech, signing out. Cheers.